Hello. In this video, I want to tell you my top 5 most bizarre facts about history of Christianity. And of course, there are many other interesting facts, but these 5 I found to be the most interesting. So let us start with the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in the early 4th century. That battle is often seen as the battle of Christianity versus paganism. The Christian emperor Constantine the Great managed to win against the pagan legions of Maxentius. It was a time when the Roman Empire was split into multiple empires and there was a war for unification, and Constantine and his Christian legions were on one side of the bridge, and Maxentius with his pagan legions was on the other side, and he outnumbered the Christian legions of Constantine 2 to 1. So the pagans had the numerical advantage, but Constantine, well, he had a brilliant strategy that enabled him to win. He hid some of his legions into the forest that was nearby, and by doing that, he managed to kind of trick Maxentius into attacking him and crossing the bridge. And once Maxentius and the first half of his legions crossed the bridge, Constantine attacked with full force. His legions started to emerge from the forest, and Maxentius was forced to retreat. And while retreating, the bridge collapsed, and Maxentius was dead. He drowned, and his body was found and decapitated by Constantine's legions, and Constantine entered Rome with the head of his enemy decapitated and put on a spear, and the Christians were victorious. And what's interesting about this story is that this battle is one of those battles that potentially changed the outcome of history. Constantine, when he became the emperor after the battle, he was still not a Christian, but he began to Christianize the empire. And why is that? Well, according to Eusebius, an ancient Roman historian, Constantine, a day before the battle, he allegedly saw a cross in the sky. And Eusebius also claims Constantine saw letters in hoc signo vinces, in this sign you will win. So that part is probably fake, but most historians agree that Constantine probably did see a solar halo. That is a real biological phenomenon that looks like a cross in the sky made from sunlight. And Constantine, according to Eusebius, then made a bargain with a Christian god. He said, if you grant me victory, I will begin to Christianize the empire. And since he won against a numerically greater army, Constantine felt he owed the Christian god a favor, and therefore he started to build churches with state money. He actually not only stopped to persecute the Christians, but he treated them favorably. He gave the church the power to confiscate the property of heretics, and he also put into Roman law that all religions are equal, and that was pretty important for the Christians. And yeah, what was bizarre is that Constantine was still as an emperor, he was a main priest of Jupiter, but now he was actually Christianizing the empire. And I found at least this idea that Constantine saw a cross in the sky, a solar halo to be more precise. I find that idea very much believable, because something happened that made him, if not a Christian, then at least a person that decided to Christianize the empire. And most of his legions were Christians as well, but still. I agree with Peter Brown and other historians that claim that actually a biological, or I should say physiological phenomenon actually potentially changed the outcome of history and made Christianity a dominant religion in the Roman Empire. I mean, probably even without this victory, Christianity would become very popular because of its populist message, but still, maybe not in time to dominate the entire empire. Uh, Perhaps the pagans would be able to eliminate the Christians once after the empire collapsed. And here we can see the monument to the victory of Constantine that still stands in Rome. So let us move on to fact number 2, the First Crusade. Well, people don't often appreciate how bizarre is the fact that the First Crusade was actually successful. At this point, the Christians were not only outnumbered by Muslims, but they were also less developed in almost all spheres, all important spheres, whether we are talking about medicine, the economy, just the population, philosophy, and I'm talking about the Western Christians, not the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. But there was one important asset that the Crusaders had, and that is heavy cavalry. The Muslims simply didn't have heavy cavalry, and the Crusaders were able to utilize this asset in many battles during the First Crusade. And one of the most bizarre sieges in history is the siege of Antioch. What happened? So the Crusaders first managed to occupy the city. The Christians within Antioch opened the gates for them, since they were kind of discriminated and second-class citizens in the Muslim caliphate. And the Christian traitors open the gates, and there is a massacre of Jews, Muslims, and even some Christians due to just a complete chaos that ensues. But after the massacre of Antioch, the Muslim rulers around Antioch are outraged, and they decide to annihilate the Christians, and a huge Muslim army is gathered and sent to give back Antioch to the Muslims. And the Crusaders are now outnumbered 2-1. Here we can see the medieval art that depicts the siege of Antioch. And the Muslims have a numerical advantage, but something bizarre happens. Peter the Hermit, one of the Crusaders, actually starts to claim that he found the Holy Lance, the holy spear with which Jesus of Nazareth was pierced, and the Crusaders now suddenly they began to believe that they are invincible. They almost believe that God is with them on the battlefield, fighting alongside them. And the Crusaders do something unexpected. They open the gates and just attack the Muslims. At this point, they believe they are unstoppable, and due to their sheer fanaticism, they manage to win. Bear in mind, at this point, the Crusaders are outnumbered 2-1. They are starving because of the siege that lasted for almost half a year, and yet they still managed to defeat the Muslim army purely because of their religious fanaticism and just the shock element. Nobody expected them to just open the gates and attack a more numerous army. And this battle actually was one of the crucial battles that enabled the Christians to capture the Holy Land, Jerusalem. And one other crazy story that illustrates the improbability of the First Crusade succeeding is the fact that when Crusaders finally reached Jerusalem, they were also outnumbered, and they were lacking in food and wood. The Muslims actually managed to burn all the wood around Jerusalem, and the Crusaders had no way of constructing catapults or trebuchets and other machines they needed, other equipment they needed in order to besiege the city. But precisely at the right time, the Genovese fleet arrives, and they They just managed to deconstruct their ships and use wood in order to construct towers and other equipment that the Crusaders needed at the time, and that is how the Holy Land is taken by the Christians. And this truly a bizarre set of coincidences made the First Crusade successful. And if I lived back in the day, and if I was a Christian, I would truly believe that God made it happen. Because yeah, the Crusaders managed to win against a more developed and more numerous civilization. Again, they only had one advantage: heavy cavalry, and they managed to utilize it. But without the bizarre story of the siege of Antioch, and without the Genovese fleet arriving precisely at the right time, yeah, the First Crusade would be unsuccessful, and perhaps the entire medieval history from that point would be different. Maybe we wouldn't see other crusades, and it's hard to imagine how medieval history would then play out. But yeah, the Crusaders in the end were victorious, and they captured the Holy Land. And in fact, the only crusade that managed to capture the Holy Land was the First and the Sixth Crusade, but the Sixth Crusade happened through diplomacy. So the First Crusade is truly the only crusade that captured the Holy Land through battle, and that's what makes it so unique and bizarre. And also the fact that it was the First Crusade probably made all the other crusades happen, because then all the other crusaders had a memory of the First Crusade succeeding. But okay, to me personally, the best example of the decadence of the Catholic Church and of the Christians diverging from the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth are not the Crusades, but actually Pope Julius II, also nicknamed the Warrior Pope. Now, at least for the Crusades, you can say, well, at least there was this idealistic idea behind it that all Christians should be united against the non-believers, and that Christians should be saved from Muslim persecution and rule. But when it comes to Julius II, he viewed the papal states as his personal domain, and he fought very bloody wars in order to enlarge his personal feudal domain. Here you can see the papal states before Julius II, so this is not under the control of the Pope and the Church. And here, after the Italian wars, you can see the Church, or the papal state, enlarging its territory. And in the early 16th century, the papal state was essentially a mini warlord state that engaged in conquering other feudal states. And what's also bizarre about the Pope Julius II, he was elected as Pope because of his promise that he will start a crusade against the Turks. But once he got into office, he suddenly changed his position, and he said that now his priority is to win against the barbarians in Italy. And when he spoke of barbarians, he was actually speaking about the French and about the Borgia family, about the Spanish feudal lords. And he was very much concerned about the French and Spanish influence in Italy. And yeah, the Italian wars are some of the bloodiest wars that happen in the early modern Europe, and they were in fact just as bloody as the Ottoman conquest of Europe. And because of this, one could say almost a fanatical crusade against French and Spanish influence in Italy that was done by Julius II, the French were actually allied with the Ottomans. But yeah, there is something truly funny to me about Pope becoming a warlord and just attacking other feudal lords around him. And Julius II was also a patron of art, which is why he rebuilt St. Peter's Basilica, and he started to Christianize the indigenous people of America. And here you can see his tomb, truly a bizarre person, Julius II, the warrior pope he was called, or the fearsome pope. And he also, yeah, rebuilt Rome in a very nice way. Okay, fun fact number 4. Early Christians in the Roman Empire in the 4th century actually started to believe that Jesus was Apollo. Yeah, and the reason for that is the fact that Constantine saw a cross made of sunlight, and therefore he assumed that Jesus was actually Apollo. And the early Christians continued to worship the sun all the way up to the 6th century when the Pope actually punished them for worshipping the sun as heretics. And some historians even claim that in Japan Christians continued to worship the sun all the way in the 17th century. They were still worshipping sun in Japan. Japanese Christians, they did. And Martin Scorsese has a brilliant movie about it called Silence, about the Buddhist persecution of Christians in Japan. And yeah, what we should also have in mind is that the early Christians, they viewed the Christian God as one God among many. So they still prayed to other gods, and they believed that Jesus was Apollo, which is interestingly why Sunday is called Sunday, because Jesus is the sun god. Apollo was the sun god. Yeah, so for the early Christians, Jesus and Apollo were the same god. And my last fun fact is not so much a fact, it is more of an observation that was made by Yuval Noah Harari. And he claims in his books, well, there is really no true reason for the Ottomans not engaging in the colonization of America. So of course they, in order to colonize America, they would have to pass either through waters controlled by Spain, which was tricky, or they could go around Africa. But it was difficult, but it wasn't impossible. They could have done it. They were one of the largest naval powers in the world. But the main reason they didn't do it is simply they lacked the wisdom or the long-term thinking to do it. They simply saw America as unimportant. But very soon Europeans became more powerful than them, precisely because they colonized America. The Spanish crown was massively enriched by all the gold that was found in the New World. Not to mention that in the modern world, one of the main reasons for the dominance of Christians over Muslims is that the United States is a Christian country, and the United States also happened to be one of the countries with the most fertile land in the world, and one of the countries with largest oil reserves in the world. But none of it, of course, was known to the people back in the 16th century. But yeah, so I could very easily imagine an alternative history in which the Ottoman Empire colonized America, and in this alternative timeline we would have the United Ottoman States of America. And probably yeah, in this weird timeline the Christians are not the most economically and militarily powerful nations in the world, but Muslims, or who the hell knows what would have happened in this scenario. But yeah, probably in this scenario Christians are not able to colonize most of the Muslim world and become the most powerful ones. But yeah, the sultans simply lacked the wisdom and long-term thinking in order to start the colonization of America. And that's all for this video.